When the world looks at Blake Shelton, it sees a superstar, a country icon with a charming smile, a golden voice, and a career that has shaped country music for decades. But behind that familiar smile, behind the laughter we saw for years on television and concert stages, lies a story far more fragile and far more human. A story that the cameras never captured and the fans never truly saw. A story of heartbreak, silence, and a man trying to understand the pieces of his life after the woman he once thought would be his forever. Gwen Stefani. Their love story had always seemed written by fate. Both were shattered from past divorces. Both were lonely in ways only broken hearts understand. And both unexpectedly found comfort in each other during one of the darkest phases of their lives. From the moment Blake and Gwen first connected on The Voice, something shifted. It wasn't just chemistry. It was survival. It was healing. Two people standing in ruins, deciding to rebuild, not alone, but together. For years, the world witnessed what looked like a modern fairy tale unfolding in real time. Fans adored them. Headlines celebrated them. Every picture, every public moment, every duet carried a spark that felt real, raw, and unmistakably loving. When they got married in 2021, it felt like the happy ending that both deserved after the heartbreaks they had endured. But the thing about fairy tales, they only show the magic, never the cracks. Behind the glamour and red carpet smiles, Blake Shelton was wrestling with something deeper, something quieter, something he never spoke fully about in interviews. He had changed his entire lifestyle, stepping away from Hollywood, choosing the ranch life, slowing down his music career, and recentering his world around Gwen and her children. It was a choice made from love, but it also came with a cost. When a man gives up too much of himself, even in the name of love, a void begins to form. And slowly, silently, that void grew. In the last year, fans began noticing a shift. Blake and Gwen were seen together less often. Their social media interactions, once playful and constant, suddenly faded. Rumors started swirling about distance, tension, separate lives. At first, nobody believed it. After all, they had survived so much already. Why would their bond weaken now? But then came the moment that changed everything. The release of their duet, Hangin, a heartbreak-laden song filled with lyrics that didn't sound fictional. They sounded personal, emotional, almost like someone trying to hold on to something slipping away. Fans immediately began to speculate. Was this song a message? A confession? A goodbye disguised as music? And then, the biggest shock, they appeared separately at events. Blake skipped major appearances where Gwen was expected. Gwen attended shows without Blake by her side. Neither explained why. For a couple that once seemed inseparable, the silence spoke louder than any statement. Insiders began whispering that Blake was struggling emotionally, spending more time alone at his ranch, avoiding media, and becoming quieter than ever. Some reports even suggested that he felt overshadowed by Gwen's world, her fame, her fashion empire, her constant presence in the spotlight, while he longed for a simpler, slower life. A life he couldn't fully have while living in two worlds. But heartbreak isn't always explosive. Sometimes it is slow, quiet, invisible. Those close to Blake described him as reflective, withdrawn, and uncertain about the future. He wasn't angry, he was hurting. Not because of any betrayal or conflict, but because two people can love one another deeply and still drift apart for reasons neither intended. Meanwhile, Gwen Stefani finally addressed the rumors in a series of interviews. She denied any breakup, calling Blake her best friend. But she also admitted her insecurities, her fears, and how fame often complicates relationships. She insisted their marriage was fine. Yet fans couldn't ignore the sadness in her eyes or the uneasiness in her voice whenever Blake's name came up. If everything was perfect, why did everything feel so fragile? Why did the music sound so emotional? Why did their public distance grow? Why did the rumors intensify instead of fade? Blake Shelton, for the first time in years, looked like a man questioning his place in the world, questioning his marriage, his career, his identity. He had sacrificed so much to build a life around love. But what happens when love changes shape? When the life you built starts feeling unfamiliar. When the person you once relied on suddenly feels miles away, even when they're standing in the same room. This is the heartbreak that the world never sees. The heartbreak hidden behind fame, cameras, and forced smiles. And now, for the first time, Blake is standing at a crossroads, not as a celebrity, not as a husband, Not as a judge on a TV show, but as a man trying to understand what happens after the fairy tale loses its shine. Is he losing Gwen? Is their love fading? Or is this just another test life has thrown at him? This is not the end of Blake Shelton's story, but it is the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter written in silence, speculation, and the emotional storm he never asked for, but now must navigate as the world kept speculating and social media filled with whispers. Blake Shelton retreated deeper into silence, a silence louder than any headline. While fans debated whether the couple was drifting apart, Blake seemed to be wrestling with a truth far more complex than a simple breakup rumor. Something inside him had shifted, and the people closest to him could sense it. This wasn't just a rough patch. It was the emotional weight of a man who had given so much of himself for love, and now felt himself slipping into the shadows of his own life. Even before the rumors, Blake had made tremendous sacrifices. When he married Gwen Stefani, he embraced not just her, but her entire world, her 3 children, her California lifestyle, her fame beyond music, her fashion empire, her commitments, her constant media presence. On the outside, it looked glamorous, but inside, Blake was a country boy at heart, shaped by wide-open fields, quiet mornings, and a simpler way of living. Stepping into Gwen's universe meant stepping away from parts of himself he had held onto his entire life. At first, he didn't mind. Love has a way of making sacrifices feel beautiful, even noble. He was proud to be a steady force in Gwen's life, a mentor for her kids, a grounding presence in the chaos of Hollywood. But somewhere along the way, the lines began to blur. Blake wasn't just adjusting, he was losing pieces of himself, piece by piece, moment by moment, until he barely recognized the man in the mirror. Friends noticed that he talked less about music, less about touring, less about the things that once defined him. He spent longer hours on the ranch, alone with his thoughts, letting the stillness speak to him. And in that silence, questions began to rise, questions he had avoided for years. Was he truly happy in this version of life? Or had he molded himself too much to fit into Gwen's world? Was love supposed to feel this heavy, this lonely? Meanwhile, Gwen's career began climbing with renewed energy. New music, new fashion partnerships, new shows, new public appearances, all with the brightness and charisma she was known for. Fans adored her. Paparazzi chased her. Her schedule filled up as fast as Blake's emptied out. The two were still married, still supportive, still loving, but their lives were moving in opposite directions, like 2 trains on different tracks, slowly drifting farther apart with every passing day. And then came the moment that fans could not ignore. They stopped appearing together. Even when the industry events were massive, when Blake was nominated for major awards, Gwen was absent. When Gwen attended fashion events, Blake was nowhere in sight. Their public disconnect grew so obvious that even people who never followed celebrity news began to ask the same question: what happened to Blake and Gwen? But what nobody understood was this: Blake didn't withdraw because he stopped caring. He withdrew because he loved too deeply, because he didn't want his struggles to dim Gwen's light. Because sometimes, even when you love someone more than anything, you need space to find yourself again. During this quiet phase, insiders shared glimpses of Blake's emotional state. Small quotes, tiny signals, moments that painted a picture of a man trying to navigate a storm inside his own heart. They said he felt disconnected, unseen, overwhelmed. They said he missed the old version of himself, the version that lived through music, not fame, the version that didn't depend on anyone's schedule or lifestyle, the version who once stood proudly as one of country music's most influential voices. But in love, when 2 people evolve at different speeds or in different directions, the distance becomes real, even if the love remains. Gwen, on the other hand, was also fighting her own battle. She addressed rumors, defended Blake, spoke lovingly about him, insisted they were still united. But there was something in her tone, a softness mixed with worry, a hint of denial, a fragile attempt to hold something together that was slowly slipping away. For all her confidence and boldness, Gwen still carried insecurities from her past relationships. She feared loss, feared abandonment, feared change, and Blake's emotional withdrawal only amplified those fears. Yet, as the world pointed fingers blamed one person or the other, neither Blake nor Gwen ever attacked each other. No accusations, no drama, no public blame. Just silence, the kind of silence that only comes when 2 people are trying to protect each other from judgment. a silence born from love, not apathy. But silence has a way of growing heavier with time, and Blake felt its weight the most. He began writing more privately, scribbling lyrics that no one heard, songs filled with longing, confusion, memories, hope, and sadness. Songs about loving someone, but losing yourself. Songs about staying strong, even when your heart feels weak. Songs about holding on, even when you don't know how much longer you can keep holding. Those close to him say he spent hours at the ranch porch, looking at the horizon as if searching for answers in the fading sunlight. He wasn't broken, just tired. Tired of pretending everything was perfect, tired of living between two worlds. Tired of trying to balance love and identity, tired of being the man everyone expected him to be instead of the man he actually was. Still, Blake never stopped loving Gwen. His actions showed it. His loyalty showed it. Even his silence showed it, because silence is sometimes the loneliest form of love. A love that doesn't want to hurt, doesn't want to blame, doesn't want to let go, but also doesn't know how to stay the same. And slowly, painfully, Blake began to realize something important. Love alone isn't always enough. Sometimes two people can love each other with all their hearts and still find themselves living different lives. The world kept watching. Fans kept analyzing. Headlines kept spinning. But Blake remained in his quiet battle. The battle to understand what comes next. The battle to choose between holding on to the life he built or rediscovering the man he once was. And as the emotional distance between Blake and Gwen grew, the question became louder. Is this heartbreak? Or is this transformation? Blake was no longer the man he used to be, and maybe, just maybe, he wasn't supposed to be. Asterisk, as Blake moved deeper into this emotional crossroads, something unexpected began to happen. He started rediscovering the parts of himself he had long buried beneath the weight of love, responsibility, and fame. The man who once lived for the roar of the crowd and the simple peace of the countryside was waking up again. Slowly, quietly, almost cautiously. It was as if the silence he had wrapped himself in was not just a shield from the world, but a space to breathe, perhaps for the first time in years. The truth is, when a relationship becomes the center of your world, you don't notice how much of yourself you've given away until you suddenly stand alone with your thoughts. Blake wasn't bitter, he was reflective. He wasn't broken, he was awakening. And through that awakening, a deeper question began forming in his heart. Had he loved Gwen so deeply that he forgot to love himself? He revisited the memories of how their love began, not with sadness, but with a kind of gratitude. Their connection had pulled him out of a dark chapter, given him hope, given him laughter again. Gwen had taught him vulnerability, taught him how to blend two completely different worlds, taught him how to care for her children as if they were his own. Their love had not been a mistake. It had been a lifeline. But lifelines are not always meant to last forever. Some are meant to save you, then set you free. As the months went by, Blake and Gwen tried to navigate the growing distance with grace, patience, and maturity. They avoided public fights, avoided dramatic interviews, avoided blaming each other. They handled their struggles the way people who genuinely care always do. Quietly, respectfully, and with a deep sense of attachment. But love is complicated, and sometimes silence becomes heavier than honesty. Blake's music became his therapy. He poured everything he could not say into melodies, the confusion, the longing, the fear of losing someone, the fear of losing himself. Those around him noticed a shift in his creativity. His new songs carried a raw emotion, a truthfulness that hadn't been present in years. His voice trembled in ways that weren't just artistic. They were personal, vulnerable, human. Meanwhile, Gwen was facing her own emotional storm. She wasn't blind to the distance. She felt it every time Blake grew quiet, every time he avoided interviews about their relationship, every time he chose the ranch over the spotlight. She worried that their lives had become too different, too far apart, too difficult to merge. But she also knew that Blake needed space, not pressure. He needed time, not confrontation. So she let him breathe, even though that breathing felt like drifting dot to the outside world. Their silence looked like heartbreak. But inside their private lives, it was something more delicate, to people trying to understand if love can survive change, distance, and the weight of evolving dreams. But with every passing day, the emotional truth became harder to ignore. Blake began spending more time at the ranch than ever before. The simplicity of the land, the quiet of nature, the freedom of open skies. It reminded him of who he once was. He met old friends, reconnected with musicians he hadn't worked with in years, and slowly rebuilt the pieces of his identity that had faded away. The man who once felt emotionally lost was finding direction again. Yet even as he rediscovered himself, a piece of his heart remained tethered to Gwen. He would still smile when someone mentioned her name. He would still get quiet when asked about their future. He would still avoid speaking negatively, even privately. Their love had been real, deep, and meaningful, and letting go even emotionally was not easy. For Gwen, the difficulty was different. She was a mother first, an artist second, a wife third, and the balancing act was beginning to show cracks. Her schedule was demanding. The kids needed her. Her career kept pulling her toward new commitments, new cities, new opportunities. She too felt the distance growing, not out of choice, but out of life's unplanned momentum. The more her world pulled her forward, the more Blake retreated into his dot. And this is where heartbreak becomes its most painful, when two people who love each other deeply realize that love alone is no longer enough to keep their worlds aligned. Still, they didn't walk away. Not immediately, not dramatically. Instead, they held on to the hope that maybe time would fix what silence had created. They tried spending more time together, tried communicating more, tried revisiting the warmth of their early days. But sometimes, when a scar begins forming in the heart, time doesn't heal it. It simply teaches you how to live with it. By this point, fans were not just curious, they were worried. Headlines about marital trouble, separate lives, and emotional distance flooded the internet. Some exaggerated, some fabricated, but some, painfully, reflected the truth. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't betrayal. It wasn't disappointment. It was life. Life pulling to people in different directions. Blake's heartbreak wasn't the dramatic kind. It was the quiet kind. The kind that settles into your bones, makes you question everything, and slowly reshapes you into someone new. He was learning to stand on his own again, learning to create without validation, learning to breathe without waiting for someone else's rhythm. And through this transformation, he discovered a painful but powerful lesson. Sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes shape. Maybe Blake and Gwen were not falling out of love. Maybe they were evolving into two people who could no longer walk the same path. Maybe they were meant to heal each other during a certain chapter of life, not forever. Or maybe this was simply a rough season, one they would look back on later as a turning point. Nobody truly knows, but one thing is certain. Blake Shelton is no longer hiding his heart behind a smile. He is confronting the truth of who he is, what he needs, and where his future leads. His heartbreak is not his ending, it is his rebirth. His silence is not weakness, it is reflection. His distance is not rejection, it is rediscovery. And whether his story with Gwen Stefani continues, or ends quietly in the background of their lives, this chapter will always remain one of the most defining, emotional, and human moments of Blake Shelton's journey. The fairy tale may have changed, but the man is becoming himself again.